Warning, Supernatural The Crossroads contains adult language and discussions. If you're easily offended, do not continue to listen.
Oh, Dad. Oh, Dad. Oh, Dad. I went to the crossroads.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Supernatural The Crossroads. I'm your host, Thomas Cowley, and joined with me through the magic of the internet today is Michael Flores.
Hello. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. You know, we jerry-rigged this at the last minute, and it's working out fairly well. So knock on proverbial wood and see what happens there.
Or real wood. You can always knock on
real wood.
as well.
You could knock on your, if you had a boner, you could knock on that.
Well,
Ryan's not here to say that, so I have to.
Well, I have a perma boner, so you can definitely just, well, not you, I'm just saying you as in general can knock on wood all the time.
A perma boner. I have not heard that.
Yeah. It's
a condition, I would think.
That was actually a monster of the week in an episode that got cut from Supernatural.
We found the script. Ryan's going to read about the perma boner monster during the June show.
Don't mock. It's going to be a thing. Watch. I don't know how or when or where, but it will.
Give Ryan give him an afternoon. He'll just write the shittiest script and say, "Yep, there you go." And then he had a boner, and that'll be the whole thing.
Listen, when Supernatural finally returns, that's going to be the name of the movie: Supernatural: The Attack of the Perma Boner.
There we go. We're already shopping subtitles.
Yeah.
All right. So this episode here, guys, is a little bit different. Something new that we have not done previously, really. We've done underrated characters. We've done breakdowns of every showrunner's episodes, their best moments, some of their weakest moments. But we haven't done something specific to Monsters of the Week, at least not in quite some time. So this new little mini series here that we're going to do is called Underrated Monsters of the Week. So over the next year or so, we plan to sort through all of our favorite monsters of the week that we've personally felt were underrated, forgotten, had far more content and possibilities than they were ever really given, and how things about those stories were very interesting and could have led somewhere else. And I think that's one of the biggest distinctions and stipulations comparing a regular generic monster of the week to something that's far more captivating, is that a generic one will just kind of be a one and done, whereas this list here is more intended to be ones that we feel could have sparked its own mini arc, its own series of events and creatures. It had far more potential than the other ones. So to kick things off, we are talking about one of, I think, our personal favorites, and that is Doc Benton, a grossly underrated, non-magical, mystical, supernatural monster of the week from season 3. And this is a concept that was very, very interesting because the character is very stereotypically B horror.
Yeah.
You know, it's something that like a Roger Corman film would have done years ago.
Yeah.
But it's also done with such like sick, twisted, thought out logic throughout the whole thing. And it fits very, very well for where the characters are at this time, especially Dean and Bella's parallel story. This is the end of Bella's story in this episode here.
The writers of the earlier seasons on Supernatural, they always pick the right monsters for the right story.
Guess who wrote this one?
Sarah Gamble, of course.
Sarah Gamble, dude.
Yeah, and do you see who directed it? One of our favorite directors too. So
yeah,
these teams are just fantastic, and every time we go back and watch, I'm just blown away again by just the skill set involved in every single episode. But yeah, Gamble obviously knowing a thing or two about the B film genre, because not only are you dealing with a very B film type of concept, but I mean, the guest spot, Billy Drago, is a B film icon. I mean, he's one of my favorite. I have different categories for actors and things. You know, I'm a guy of lists. I have lists and categories all the time. I put things in categories and lists. Sounds very OCD.
Your house looks like Charlie from It's Always Sunny, and you just got yarn attaching different lists together.
Always got to put together those top 10 lists and categories. But Billy Drago is on my list of top B film actors. He is fantastic. He's right up there with Bruce Campbell, you know, Lance Hendrickson. They've all had their moment to bask in the glory of mainstream success, but they have always returned to the smaller B films. In the end, even when they didn't need to, Billy Drago was a pretty famous B film actor, and I use famous loosely. He definitely became more of a caricature of himself as the years went by. But he had his moments, and to bring Billy Drago into an episode of Supernatural, it blew my mind when it happened in the 2000s. And every time this episode comes up, my mind immediately drifts to Billy Drago, and I'm just amazed at the fact that they were able to get him in the Supernatural. I mean, the only thing at this point that's left out when you have an actor like Billy Drago and the list of other big B film icons and you know, 90s TV show icons as well that they had brought into the show. But then the only thing they're missing is someone like Bruce Campbell. I mean, that's the obvious next step, especially with all of the Evil Dead references and inspirations.
I'm kind of surprised they didn't,
right?
As time went on.
How did you not reach out to someone like Campbell? And maybe they did, and for whatever reason, he passed on it. Which, if we were talking about Bruce Campbell today, the guy doesn't pass on anything. So I mean, he might have been feeling that Spider-Man high, because I know the director of Spider-Man, the original one, Tobey Maguire, he was the guy responsible for starting Bruce Campbell's career. And he always Sam Raimi, and he always found spots for Bruce Campbell, and he was putting him in Spider-Man for those little 2-bit roles. So maybe he was just like, fuck it.
Well, and that was 2002, 4, and 7. So he may not have wanted to jump right back into this kind of B campy stuff that he was trying to get out of, especially as Spider-Man was taking off as it was. So maybe it would have been, it's too bad, because that would have been one that I think you would have tried even years later in the later seasons to try and get him. But Billy Drago is a great choice. He's a B, as you said, a B film icon, and he's got the perfect temperament and creepy mannerisms to fit Doc Benson perfectly. So
Benton was a black dude in a sitcom show back in the 80s. Remember Benson?
So with this one here, time is on my side. One of the last episodes of season 3, the one with the infamous writer strike, cutting it short, but despite that still being one of the strongest seasons I think the show's ever had. This character is introduced at a time that really does parallel our characters incredibly well. And this is once again a great example of how these side characters need to reinforce the main character's plight, what they're going through, not just be guest appearances or not just be cool. We haven't done this yet. Hey, I saw Paranormal Activity. Let's do the Bitten episode. And
right.
Just call it a day, you know, because that's a whole other thing. But this here, in this episode, the summary real quick, just to put everybody in perspective. As time runs out for Dean, Sam convinces him to head to Erie, Pennsylvania to investigate a possible zombie case. Instead, they discover Doc Benton, a real-life doctor who in 1816 abandoned his medical practice to follow his obsession with finding the key to eternal life by drugging people and stealing their vital organs. Now that's macabre as hell as it is. And this is obviously Frankenstein inspired. This is the first crux, little seed that would become the Stein story, I truly believe, 7 years later. There's no way you didn't compare notes with this story.
Right.
You couldn't not. I mean, it was the only one that was all scientific based and as creepy as it was, and literally the same idea of stealing organs. Like, you're going to check that and see what you can borrow from it, what doesn't work, what does. And the thing is, this character is a fascinating character, but at the same time, this episode is an incredibly important episode for season 3's myth arc. And it's an incredibly memorable episode with such an underrated and not often referenced monster of the week at the same time. You would think that the two would go hand in hand. The death of Bella, a maybe not at the time well-received character, but has clearly grown with the fan base as time has moved on. A very dark season, might be the darkest season I think that we had, especially at the time. It's far darker than 1 and 2. It makes 1 and 2 look like,
and not just dark in the way, and not just dark in the way of content, meaning like characters like Doc Benton or murder and mayhem. Just the themes are dark. Our characters weren't happy. We were used to a very, fun bunch,
uplifting, and
even though there were dark times and very sad moments in season 1 and 2, season 3 was hitting that morbid medium where we weren't quite happy and we weren't quite morbid as fuck. We were getting there. There was
less laughs, I would say. It was the biggest difference. Like season 1 and 2 had a lot of humor that was built into the story, and the major events were still very serious. This was one where even as Dean made jokes, even as the jokes land, there's this air of sadness beneath all of them. I think the Christmas episode is a great example of that.
Yeah. For sure.
And it might be that the reason Doc Benton as a character has kind of slipped through the cracks and not remained on any top lists. I don't even know if our own lists that we've done over the years have incorporated him.
No.
But part of that might be because the episode truthfully has very little to do with him. It's not centered around him. He's not the driving force behind it. He's literally just the problem that week.
When it comes to plot, he's not even that relevant. It's all about the unsaid with a character like this.
Yeah, it's more about what he represents as a potential route for Dean. At this time, Dean is at a crossroads.
Right.
Hence the show, the name here. But he's dealing with impending death. I mean, at this time, canonically, it's like weeks or something like that, or months. I don't even 100% remember. And of his year left alive. And Bella is one route. He sees himself potentially going down, trying to outrun it. Doc Benton is another route of trying to cheat death by doing something truly horrible, by sacrificing your humanity. And he doesn't want either of those things. But this whole character it's not about him as a character. It's about him posing an ethical question.
Well, and that's why I feel like a character like this, as you had started your thought, that's why a character like this is possibly forgotten. Because when you bring him up and you remind people, in fact, this happened on the internet when I was talking to people about this discussion that I was planning. It's not that they didn't like it. It's like, oh, fuck, yes, I remember that. Like that was a really cool concept. And I feel like the reason why is because there's so much going on at this point. This is episode 15 of a season that was already shortened because of the strike at that time. So we're already coming to the end. There is literally so much in the way of subtext and narrative in this episode. There's things pertaining to Bella and Dean, as you were getting into, and posing questions pertaining to, morality and ethics. And because of that, the story really isn't about Doc Benton at all. He's just there. He's just there to assist, to help tie everything together. And because of that, that's why he slips through the cracks and isn't really remembered as one of the greatest Monster of the Weeks, because this really isn't a Monster of the Week episode.
It really isn't. It's the second to last episode of the season. It's the end of Bella's character and wrapping that up. It's escalating the stakes once more to show the lack of choices that Dean has that hangs over this entire season, is that time is running out. Like each week was a clock. And you're right. He is the third story in this episode. There's Sam and Dean's story, there's the Bella story, and then there's also the Doc Benton story. So he's just this umbrella that encases everything, but isn't really that relevant.
No, he's just a device that helps Dean and Sam put things into perspective. And as we said, posing those ethical questions about cheating death, because isn't that where we're at this point? We're dealing with the boys cheating death, specifically Dean at this moment. And that's why you tie in the scenario of Bella, and suddenly you're like, okay, I get what's going on here, because how far are you willing to go in order to keep yourself alive? I mean, Benton also parallels Bella's own desperation to stay alive and what she's willing to do. I mean, she essentially tried to murder Sam and Dean.
Yeah, she does try.
The only reason why she didn't is because they pulled one over on her. But in order to save herself from the Hellhounds, she willingly was going to put a bullet in both Sam and Dean. That's no different than Ben. In fact, she probably got away easy when you think about it. I mean, Benton is buried alive for all eternity, essentially.
Now, I can't 100% remember. He would eventually die when the organs fail, though.
You can't. Right? No, that's the awful.
Or was that the thing?
That's the awful thing.
Live forever.
He could live forever. I mean, essentially, if his skull got crushed or something, maybe then he would die. But as long as you can replace body parts and nothing's there to disturb him, I would assume he would sit there eroding and rotting,
slowly decay until.
Yeah,
that would eventually do it. But that's years.
Yeah, I would imagine that once his organs started failing and everything started,
Yeah.
But I wasn't quite sure how it worked. It looks like he can die, but then he comes back.
They used chloroform to knock him out.
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah.
Because he put it in his heart, right? He stabbed him with something into his heart, and then he seized up.
Yeah, he passes out from that. And their own dad, cut his heart out, according to the story. So he can survive serious trauma. But I would just assume 50 years or more, eventually it'll happen. But still, that's a hellish existence. And you're right. Bella probably did get off easier by comparison.
I'd probably rather get torn up by hellhounds and sent to hell.
It'd be quicker, at least.
Yeah.
The insanity that would set in while you're trapped under there.
At least you're having, someone's keeping you company. They may be torturing you, but at least you're surrounded by people in hell. In the fucking, ground in a refrigerator, you're just like, okay, now what the fuck? Dude, that's another aspect of horror that's just not utilized enough. The idea of burying someone alive is one of the most awfulest things. That deeply bothers my soul. When I think of it's right up there as one of the worst ways. If someone were to say, hey, Mike, what's the worst way to die? It's either between being burned alive or being buried alive. Those two things for me are two of my biggest fears that it truly disturbs me whenever you watch something on TV or a movie that utilizes that type of element in a horror film.
Drowning would be another pretty bad one, too.
Yeah, but you know what? At least with drowning, you're surrounded by nature and the ocean. I'm assuming you're drowning in the ocean. I mean, you can also be drowned by a piece of shit person in your toilet water, and that would suck.
Like you dove too deep and the suction kept you down there.
Yeah, that'd be awful. That's Darwinism, though. I mean, if you well,
that'd be terrible.
I swam every day and died. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of great horror elements to this episode. And that's the thing that's really amazing about it is that all this thought and time and world building of this character is put into something that's the third string of this episode.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
That's nuts. They don't, see, that's the thing, they don't do that as much.
No.
Later on.
No, not at all.
Now, one of the coolest things about this episode and much of the first decade or so of the show are the lore and tidbits of information that's sprinkled throughout the entire series, throughout the episodes, ever so carefully.
Yeah.
And this episode is a perfect example of that correctly done, proper world building without needing to waste a shitload of time.
Or without useless hackish exposition, which usually is what happens when you're dealing with shows like this. When you're dealing with the world of Supernatural, or you're dealing with those larger than life scenarios, many times they do require an explanation. And I feel like a lot of people, a lot of writers in certain writing rooms, they just assume, okay, well, this is a really peculiar type of topic. We really need to make sure people understand it. But there's a beautiful, there's something to be said about simplicity sometimes. And
Absolutely.
in an episode like this, I feel like the more we know, the less it works.
Absolutely. I think this is compare the mystery and intrigue of this to later things that the show would explain away with, Death and Billy, or the Menelader's bunker, or things like to that extent.
Mm-hmm.
This episode here is incredibly interesting because it doesn't give you much. The concept is that he was mentioned in John's journal, that there's talk of a surgeon who found a way to live forever by replacing organs the moment they stopped working. So he's harvesting body parts. So that's already horrifying, and it gives you enough to know. But it doesn't delve deeper into that. And we'll get into this in a second. But and Sam basically says, yeah, it's not magic too.
But
that alone is exceptionally different and interesting for this world. Meanwhile, you compare that to something like Men of Letters, and it's like, oh, here's a ritual. I need these parts. This is what happens, and this is what the result is.
Although
Okay.
I honestly feel like Elements in Carver's run, an episode like this, that's the groundwork a bit. When you look at the Men of Letters, that pretty much deals in alchemy and magic, and also the Steins, also, by the way, steal body parts. So it makes you wonder how much of the Steins' effort is also aligned with what Benton does, and vice versa. Like, I know the Steins used the Book of the Dam and they used magic as well, but we're not quite sure.
Right.
I can't remember if Carver had established they use magic, if magic was actually a part of what the Steins do. I can't quite remember.
I'm pretty sure it was.
I know they
because
control.
otherwise, why were they chasing Charlie so much for that?
Right. I know they do magic and they're into that whole thing, but I'm not sure if the way they live on, their immortality, has to do with magic. I don't know if they actually spelled that out. I feel like a lot of us just assumed because we're dealing with the world of Supernatural.
Right.
But I could be wrong. Either way, it's the reason why the Steins worked for me as well. It's that same thing. The idea of, body horror and grotesque, grotesque, illegal science experiments, which are awful, which we already know.
Crimes against nature.
Crimes against nature. Yeah, like Dr. Moreau and, the Dog Man and all types of weird, fucked up shit. Yeah. And all of this, which is interesting that we're talking about. First off, one episode, not even the focus of the episode. And also, pretty much all of Doc Benton's lore was established in probably 2, maybe 3 60-second scenes. And
that's impressive.
Maybe not even a full 60 seconds on some of them. I think that's fantastic that they were able to fully establish this concept in just a matter of seconds. And it lives on. It becomes a part of our show, a part of the fandom, something we speculate about and discuss. That's how you know you're good at what you do, is when these types of things stick.
Well, the other thing, too, to consider about that, like from a writing standpoint, this is one more reason why I think Sarah Gamble's probably the best writer they've ever had, because 60 seconds is one page, essentially. And if you've ever looked at a script, whether you're a fan of that kind of thing or you just want to casually glance at one for your, curiosity's sake, that's not a lot when it comes to dialogue. Dialogue is in the center. It takes up a lot of space. The format You get a lot less spoken word for page length. To be able to do that in such a compelling way means that was incredibly limited dialogue and incredibly tight and focused on what needed to be said.
Yeah.
That's impressive as hell.
Yeah. That
For
shows
a brand new concept.
that's a mark of, and we should know, I mean, Sarah Gamble has grown to become one of the probably better writers in Hollywood currently when it comes to TV shows. I mean, this episode right here is proof of that. Proof that, she was already working on her skill set to becoming one of the greater writers in Hollywood, because just look at how clean this episode is. Sure, there was probably some rewrites, but the fact that she was part of the leadership at this point, along with Crippy, of course, I mean, they know what they're doing. They're trimming these scripts and keeping them at the length, or I should say tight as possible to maximize their screen time and those pages.
Well, and again, because this is the third storyline of the episode.
Yeah.
So you have to be very economic with what you're getting across so that you can get the other two primary stories complete.
Yeah.
In the 42 pages you have. Now, one of the cool ways that they did that, is John Winchester's journal, which at this time was the perfect source of information. And it states that John thought he had stopped him, had already fought him. And we see this in one of the comic books as well. I think it was the Origins comic that he actually fights Doc Benton. And he thought he had defeated him and stopped him by cutting out his heart. But apparently that didn't do shit. Not for long. And so we find out from there that as long as he can replace his body parts, he could essentially go on living forever. And this is something that I think was directly but used as a source of inspiration for Carver's run with the Steins of multiple organs, more muscle mass to be stronger, so that it wasn't just a one and done kind of thing. If he had only one heart, perhaps he had a second, we don't really know. And this is where the mystery of how that works comes into play, especially when we take into account that they full on state Doc Benton figured all this out, this proverbial fountain of youth, through actual science, not magic. It's not mysticism. In this, he's using alchemy at best, which, pseudoscience perhaps, but not when it comes to this kind of world. And being a surgeon, and through just medical science, he cured death. One, that's creepy as fuck, and that's the whole story of Frankenstein, what he was trying to do. And what I loved about this was that Sam talks about the formula, but he doesn't go into it. And he just talks about, it's real science. This is no magic, no dark magic, nothing supernatural to this. Again, that wasn't used, but...
Well, that's the thing that's always that always has stuck with me the most out of everything that's cool about this episode pertaining to Doc Benton. The part that it's actual science, is something about that really worked for me when Sam said, dude, this isn't magic. This isn't black magic. There's no, blood sacrifice. This is legit. This is science. It made it actually more awful. It was more disturbing knowing that you are just, again, an abomination to nature. These types of things shouldn't exist. Magic, at least you can argue, hey, it belongs, it's a part of the world, it's part of the universe, the unexplored, the unknown. But now we're dealing with the atrocities of science experiments and the stealing of body parts to create a monster of sorts. I mean, that to me is more horrifying than if it was magic. In fact, if it was just some dude, taking people's body parts and he was using magic to stay alive, there would be there's nothing interesting about that at all.
So, you know what I think that is, though? I think that's because with magic, it's clean. Magic is a clean solution. You just snap your fingers, you crush some things into a mortar and pestle, say an incantation, and it works. It works as intended. There's no getting dirty with it. Whereas the science aspect, the real world, and the Frankenstein idea puts into the mind's eye, puts into our mentality the disgusting aspect, the blood, the gore, the finding the body parts, the cutting, the whole thing. It's messy. It's intrusive, it's violating, it's all these messed up things, sewing body parts back together. It's not snap your fingers magic, it's clean.
Yeah.
This is dirty, gross work. And I think that adds to the horror, that adds to the reality of it, because magic also has that even in the world of supernatural, it has that little bit of a separator where it's less real. But with this, there's no getting away from that. You know, that's something that we can all relate to on a deeper level. And I think that's what helps make this all the more fucked up, frankly.
Yeah.
And I also like that they didn't reveal the formula, the scientific formula that he was using to solve this. Because
sometimes the unsaid is better. And
exactly,
you have to know as a writer when you should tell someone something and when it should be omitted.
Well, and we didn't need the formula. We needed to know that it was science and that this is what he's doing to keep himself alive. But we don't need to know, 2 ounces of sodium plus 4 liters of water. I don't need that. I don't need something that'll put Ryan to sleep.
A couple cheeseburgers, semen.
A dash of honey.
A dash of semen. Oh. Like, how come that can never be a part of any magical spell? Like, you need the breast milk of a hot woman. Like, oh, shit. You figured this one out.
All right,
Let
me call up everyone we know.
We go to all the newly birthed children's and
I have to rob a nursery ward. That's terrible.
It's always weird stuff. See, that's not weird to me. Like, it's always like chicken bones.
That's not weird to you.
No, breast milk, that could be a thing. I could do that. Like, listen,
but
Mike,
finding the Pope's
the
femur,
fountain of youth is you need to guzzle a gallon of hot chick breast milk. I'd be like, all right, bottoms up. Is this 2% or slim?
2%. That's whole milk, dude. It's going to have that rich taste.
Oh, that's right.
What am I talking about?
You know what you're talking about. I think you've had a little bit of the slurpy slurp of the natural mother's milk. And I don't mean when you were a child. I mean recently.
All right. So
That's
the other
disgusting.
thing about that,
you're so fucking gross. Why would you bring that up? You're like Homeland.
I know.
You just love milk, breast milk.
Oh God, the Homelander scenes down in my
Enough of your
head.
fetishes. Enough of them.
I'll try and control it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, that whole fact that it's actual science is more disturbing than magic. And
well, also, don't you
that
think
whole thing?
Don't you think if it was also not magic, it just wouldn't have the same effect? Because again, remembering the point of Doc Benton and what it meant for both Bella and, of course, Dean. More importantly, if he was a dude or just a monster or he was using magic, it would not resonate.
Yeah,
because we needed to essentially look at Dean through a dingy lens. And that's who we saw. It was Doc Benton. This is your option, Dean. Is this really what you want to do? Do you want to cheat death? Do you want to become an abomination of nature? Well, this is what happens. This is what it means to sell your soul. Is this really what you want to do? And they double down with the Bella scenario, which makes it even that much more impactful. And it only works with Benton being human and not using magic.
I think you also, when it's not magic, when it's a true human trying to solve, because I mean, historically, that you could argue that's part of what religion is. It's trying to outrace our mortality, the belief that there's something else afterwards. That you needed to have a character that has that desperate vibe.
Absolutely.
That the clock is ticking, that he has to do this, otherwise the Reaper will find him and time is running out. If you have magic, again, it makes it too clean and easy. So this had to be dark and gritty, done in an unethical, horrifying, immoral way. It had to be desperate, that it would push our characters to a place that, like you said, asks Dean the question, is this what you want to become?
He also couldn't.
Is the alternative.
And also, he couldn't be just straight up evil, because I wouldn't consider Doc Benton straight up evil. He's a bad person. He's choosing to take other people's lives in order to prolong his. But at the same time, he also doesn't kill anyone unless he absolutely has to. So,
He doesn't do it for like the fun of it.
No, he does it out of necessity to survive. And that, again, sells the idea. What is Dean willing to do to stay alive? You know, the desperation plays a major factor in that.
Well, and it also gives us a nice, it's like the stages in a way. Bella is desperate. Dean, Bella, and Doc Benton are all desperate. Dean is desperate and time's running out and he's trying to find a good guy moral solution. Bella shows us that the consequences of that and how desperate he might get while still being with not 100% a monster. If he continues down that path, he'll become Bella. If he continues beyond that, he'll become Doc Benton, which is not a human anymore, not by our standards. And it's like the stages of decay of how even if you outrace this clock, the 1 year, you got the 10 year. And if you outrace the 10 year, you've got Doc Benton's lifetime. And like, how long are you going to perpetuate this? And it only gets more and more bleak as time goes on. Yeah. And ultimately, it leads perfectly to how they dealt with Doc Benton. Doc Benton's death, quote, solving his being buried alive, is very, very fucked up. It's very, very dark and morbid, but it's also a perfect metaphor for what he already, without, realizing it by being trapped in a refrigerator, underground, he's already trapped by this, his own situation. He has to keep doing this if he wants to survive that eternal living nightmare. That's a metaphor. When he's out of it, it's what he's going into when they bury him alive. It's what Bella is heading towards. It's what Dean is heading towards. An unstoppable, impending, eternal torture. Whether it's in a fridge or in hell, this is coming for you because of the decisions you've made. And that's the sad thing, is that the way he gets buried alive, and then we immediately go to Bella and she gets killed by the hellhounds and the clock is literally strikes midnight. It all has this just overwhelming, and this is what we talk about when we say darker tone, this overwhelming sense of dread. Yeah. Doc Benton was smarter than him and didn't get out of it. Bella was craftier and had beaten them every time throughout this season. She was smarter than them, and she didn't beat it. And he's got a week. That's a very morbid place as we go into the season finale.
Without a doubt.
And that's the thing, is like, I think that's one of the things that really stuck with me the most about season 3 was just, I love season 5. I love the apocalypse. I love season 4 where it's building up to it. I love the impending countdown, but all of that felt more like it was building towards a bigger climactic battle. The horsemen, Michael versus Lucifer, the angels, heaven and hell, where the brothers trapped in between this. It was more epic. But season 3's racing clock, or ticking clock, I should say, is just sad. It's just dark and depressing and very, very human.
Well, that's
no real good way out.
That's why that ending with him being buried alive, Doc Benton, was so meaningful and powerful, because you're right. It was a metaphor. It was a metaphor for a lot of things. The three of them are, victims of the prisons they create for themselves, their choices. I mean, even though Dean's a good guy, he made the choices to be where he's at. Now, is he going to do what he wants to do out of desperation? So there's a lot going on with these scenes as well, from a academic standpoint, from a cinematic standpoint as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's a very unsettling feeling when the camera pulls up and you see them looking down at what was Benton's grave site, essentially, where they're going to bury him, and just having that book on top of the refrigerator, and then that's it, how it ends. I mean, that's just, it's not a happy ending at all. It's very intentional. Pretty much everything in this episode.
Not an ounce of it is wasted. It's very, very much on point with that. And, when we look at it makes you wonder, obviously Frankenstein was the inspiration on some of it, but there's also a little bit more, like the whole visual metaphor too. Obviously, the fridge and being trapped within that, but the journal itself has the Ouroboros, which we know later from later seasons is referenced. It just for the fuck of it doesn't mean anything. But this here, it's that's the serpent eating its own tail. Like you're always going to be chasing this perpetual thing, and it's destroying you at the same time. And it really does leave our heroes and our audience with a very moral question of what would you do? And there's no real good answer to this whole thing. And it makes, this has what it takes to be a top tier Monster of the Week episode from its sustainability, like how much you can do with this concept. The writers in this single episode are able to expand the world in a huge way, because after this, you really do look at Supernatural a little bit differently.
Yeah.
It's not just monsters and vampires and werewolves. It's going to be humans, and it's going to be moral gray areas, and it's going to be people who started out with the best of intentions. Dean starts with the best of intentions to save Sam and to stop Yellow Eyes, and look at where it can lead to. And this is where it's really going to change how we look at other characters.
Well, yeah. Well, this episode is, the reason why I picked this topic to start our Monster of the Week discussion is because this is a perfect example of how I'm going to pick my top tier Monster of the Weeks. And I'm going to pick it with the eye of sustainability and permanence. Like, can you actually see additional stories spawning from a mere introduction? And of course, does it make you look at the world of Supernatural differently? And are you filled with questions of what ifs? Like, what if you could do this? Or what if they do that? And if you're left with those types of questions, an era of possibilities, of endless possibilities, then that's what's going to continually make our list of discussions for the Monster of the Week. And Dog Bitten pretty much encompasses all those requirements, or those prerequisites.
Absolutely. And I do like that point, especially that it does make you ask, what if? Because if he figured this out, what other fucked up stories about humans can we tell? What other science and immoral things are out there lurking in the darkness? And it makes, like I said, the whole world kind of grows from this in a completely different way, that we anticipated more monsters and more folklore and things to supernatural extent. But this more human, Frankenstein, Edgar Allan Poe, Lovecraft, like anything could go then.
Well,
Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it made me ask, what if? Like, what other stories are we going to incorporate into this? So,
yeah.
And that is, I think, the best way to move forward with this mini series.
Well, isn't that what we always say, too? We always say, when it comes to Supernatural, we've said this for years, whenever there was rumors, pertaining to when the show would end. Like, why would it end? That's what we always said. Why would it end?
Yeah.
The possibilities are endless. And when people have said, oh, you still watch Supernatural? Yeah, I gave up like 6 years ago. It ran out of gas after season 5. I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you? That is completely inaccurate, because once again, the possibilities are literally endless. I mean, how many times have we talked about the finale, Thomas? And we're like, okay, they can do this. They can do this. They can bring back the show by doing this. Actually, they can do this. There are so many different ways you could make this show work. And it's only because of the episodes of Supernatural, like the Doc Bent episode, that are responsible for laying down the groundwork so that we do have this robust world. And without these types of episodes, we wouldn't have all these possibilities, because when you have episodes continually setting down groundwork, you just get more possibilities on top of possibilities. So, I mean, that's what makes Supernatural work so well for me, pertaining to when it comes to the folklore and the aspects of the supernatural.
Now, there is a little bit, you did some research
some
and found
research.
something.
I did
some research.
We did some research, y'all.
Did some book learning and internet searching. And found some actual like inspiration for Doc Benton as a character.
There's literally real folklore behind Doc Benton. Yes. There was actually a Dr. Benton.
Okay, so I'll just read this here, which is creepy as it is. Thomas Benton, born in the early 1800s in a town near Hanover, the son of a prominent family, Tom was sent to the University of Heidelberg, Germany, to attend medical school. Although Tom excelled as a student, he felt like an outsider among other Germans and formed a close relationship with only one elderly professor.
Oh.
Although he was kindly, there was something strange about the professor. The other faculty members shunned him, and the students whispered about, quote, blasphemous experimentation. But he took Tom under his wing, and the two spent many nights discussing medicine, science, and theology.
This sounds
When
suddenly very homoerotic.
It does. Batman had a young ward who lived with him. No. When the old professor died, he left Tom some arcane books and a small locked chest, which Tom brought back to New Hampshire after graduation. Tom quickly became the most respected doctor in New Hampshire and could heal any patient who came to him. But in 1816, he learned the limits of his medical skills. His beautiful fiancée, the daughter of a wealthy landowner, came down with typhoid fever.
Oh.
Tom was unable to cure her, and she died in his arms. Shock was more than he could take. Tom abandoned his home and medical practice and retreated to a ramshackle cabin on Mount Moosilauke. I don't know how to say that.
Moosilauke.
The only possessions he brought with him were the books and the small locked chest given to him by his mentor in Heidelberg.
Oh.
You see, the old professor had been working on the secret of eternal life. Tom's fiancée may have died, but Tom was determined to defeat death itself.
That's crazy.
Weird, which is, a story we've heard, Pet Cemetery, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Weird things began to occur around the mountains. Farm animals were found dead, their corpses unmarked, except for a single small wound behind their left ear. The body of a young man was stolen from the undertaker, who only to be discovered on Mount Moosilauke, with a small wound behind his ear. Although the locals pitied Tom for his broken heart, they didn't support livestock killing and grave robbing. A group of officials trekked up the mountain to confront him, but when they reached his cabin, it was empty. Tom had run off into the woods, driven mad by grief and by his experimentation. He had discovered the secret of eternal life, but at the cost of his sanity.
He couldn't live without that ass. Listen, I want to know, did Doc Benton ever, steal a dick? Listen, you have to replace the body parts as they decompose. So at some point, Doc Benton...
He had to
steal a penis.
You'd go for a bigger one,
unless
right?
I'd be stalking black dudes all the time. Okay, that dude right there, he's my next. Who cares if the shade doesn't match? As long as the damage is.
But have you seen his face? He doesn't care if anything matches.
Yeah, I mean, just
you can have one different dick colored from his balls.
I got a black man's dick. Oh, you mean you have a big dick? No, I actually have a black man's dick.
I actually physically have. He's on Tinder swiping. That's what his profile says.
Hey, girl, but send you a dick pic. That's not your dick. That's a black guy's dick. Exactly.
It's mine now.
It's my dick now. It could be yours. Oh man,
it could be yours. Jesus.
Right.
That story, German folklore or not, I do like that it has the story of him running out into the woods, because that's how Pet Cemetery ends.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert as well. So that is cool, but there's a lot of cool things about this episode. And I think that's the thing, is that it's once again an example of where they didn't just say, it's a vampire, whatever, fuck it, and change the canon. They came up with something brand new that fit the story, the characters, the side characters.
Well, they're not just using, at this time, they're not, and I'm not saying Supernatural did this all the time in later years, but I'm saying, in the early seasons, when there wasn't a whole lot of lore, or I should say, not nearly as much lore as the later years, obviously, the writers were very careful with the types of monsters they introduced, because 90% of the time the monsters were being introduced very carefully in a way that would actually help with the story, that would assist with the development of the plot or help, as motivation for a character. The monsters were always an afterthought. It wasn't, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we had a vampire or a werewolf? No, it was about helping and aiding the episode. And you could say the same thing about many of the guest spots, but even more so, the monsters are more subtle. I feel like when you use those regular guest spots, like, the familiar face, that you then say, oh, look, they're going through the same problems as Sam and Dean. That's a little bit on the nose at times, and it's a little obvious. But when you're dealing with something evil like a monster or a creature, and they're using that as a way to, state your commentary on the episode, it's more impactful and less insulting in a lot of ways because it's more subtle.
Absolutely. And that's often missed. Like the subtle stuff is often more memorable when it comes to horror, especially.
Yeah.
So Doc Benton is a great character, a very, very interesting one, and one that I really do wish we had more of, frankly, or that there had been. We kind of got spiritual successor with the Steins, but even that we wanted more of.
Yeah. I would say Doc Benton, and maybe when we're all done in about a year and a half with these discussions, maybe we can go back and do a ranking system. But I would say for sure Doc Benton he's got to be on I can't say top 5. There's just too many. But I could probably say comfortably, I could say 10. Definitely on my top 10 monsters of the week. For sure.
Yeah. It's a tough list to get on to. Let's be real.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, he's definitely worthy of a spot and worthy of more content. It's a shame, but at least we got him in a comic book, if nothing else.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, we can wrap now.
Yeah, but that's going to do it here for us here at Supernatural Crossroads. Hopefully you enjoyed this discussion of underrated monsters of the week. And like Mike said, we will be going over others. I can think of like 5 immediately that I would like to have seen more of and had far more interesting potential and real world lore inspirations that really are just one and done.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to this series. Hopefully you all enjoyed as well. Thank you. We'll see you all next time.
You little maggot. You are no longer a part of this story. Hey, ass butt.